everybody, and welcome to ExtermiNERDus, the Warhammer 40,000 podcast talking about all things related to the hobby. My name is Alex. Today we're going to be talking about what is Warhammer, and with me I have Shane.
Yo.
He's our scholar, and over here we got Zach, our newbie.
I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing.
Right, and so hopefully by the end of this three-part series, you are going to know a little bit about what you're doing. And we're kind of just going to kick it off and talk about what Warhammer 40,000 is. And so I'll go into it a little bit here, and then we'll kind of all go around and talk about this hobby and what it is and how and why people get excited about it. And mostly it is a tabletop war game in which two or more people bring.
I mean, saying it's mostly a tabletop war game is kind of disingenuous. That might be how it started, but there's so many other aspects to it now. There's the games, the games, the books, all sorts of other stuff. There's cosplay. The hobby's really taken on a life of its own. It's saying it's mostly the tabletop is just it's a bit disingenuous.
Well, you bring up a good point here. You said something there that every 40K person says, and it's the hobby, right? That is what it's like referred to as colloquially by the nerds, the neckbeards, let's be real, like us who play this game. And it's
more of a nebulous entity than anything.
right.
Like the warp.
Exactly. Well, hold on. That is a whole other can of worms shortly. And but when we say the hobby, we mean the tabletop war game, which is like imagine Risk, but on steroids. And then it's also a universe, a storyline, a kind of setting is what it is. Essentially, is a setting in which there are books and movies and video games and everything else Shane said. And people.
And then like one of the things that really draws people to the whole tabletop scene is that you're essentially the Warhammer universe is the framework of the story, and then you're telling your own story with the battles you're doing. That's another reason that Warhammer is so popular, is because it's equal parts wargaming and storytelling.
Right, and so like Zach, I know you play Dungeons and Dragons and things like that, so it's got a lot of that same sort of storytelling element in different scale usually, but it's it's really a great place to tell your own narrative.
So is it a lot like D&D where you kind of make up your own story? Is there like a role similar to a dungeon master?
Well, not really. That's kind of a big feature, but it is a lot of these are the things my squad can do, and a dice roll will determine its effectiveness versus whatever it's trying to impact. However, there's not so much a DM as much as you guys have kind of coming to the table, come up with your own. If you care about that background, your own story for why this is happening. Perhaps, a skirmish is taking place.
Like
or a library or something that has.
Yeah, like the Necrons are waking up from a tomb world, and the Astartes need to hold them off so that the civilians can evacuate. Something like that.
Yeah, I
Right.
definitely understand everything that was just said.
Right. Well, we tossed around a lot of names, and we're gonna get to that in a little bit.
Don't
here.
worry. It's basically you bring what you want story-wise to the table. If you want there to be a reason that these two factions are kicking the crap out of each other, that's great. Go for it. If that gets you into the hobby, tell all the stories you want. But you could just go in for the strategy part of it, the modeling part of it. That's another reason that's another reason so many people love the game, is because there's so many different aspects to get you to play.
Yeah, and and that's a good point. You don't have to do all of it, right? Some people just paint. Some people just read the books. Some people play the role-playing games, such as Wrath and Glory and other role-playing games that are written in that setting.
I love me some Wrath and Glory.
Fantastic. For anybody who hasn't tried Wrath and Glory 2.0, it recently came out, and it is amazing. All right. Anyway, we're getting sidetracked already. Look at that.
Yeah.
But
like a perfect example of what Alex was just saying is Alex is more into the painting side of models, and I'm more into the customization side of models. Like his models are painted way better than mine ever will be, but my models are customized
in ways that he doesn't have.
I hate, drilling the plastic and using what's called green stuff, which is like a modeling putty to make new shapes and stuff. That's just not for me. But we'll get into that, and I think we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. But let's talk about what that setting is. We've kind of been talking about it, right? Like we're saying, oh, it's a setting, it's a setting. What does it look like? Why is it Warhammer 40,000? And so, Shane, do you want to tell us a little bit about just why it's called the Warhammer 40,000? What kind of the basic premise is? Very basic, low level.
So the quick and dirty is it's called Warhammer 40K because it's set in the 40,000th millennia by humankind's calendar year. And basically what's going on is humanity's trying to fight off all these different alien races, which are called Xenos and stuff, and try and maintain their grip on the universe and insert them as the basically alpha race of the universe. Is essentially what it boils down to. And another really important thing to note in this setting, there are no good guys.
Yeah, you know how Star Wars, you have the Empire and it is the bad guys, and you have the Jedi and they're the good guys. Although the Empire did nothing wrong.
I think you mixed that one up.
Yeah, you're right. I said it and it sounded wrong. But shit, already we're 10 minutes in and Disney's coming at us. But
the point is, there's varying shades of gray, even within factions. Like
even within a squad of soldiers, like it's very real, and that's one of the best things about Warhammer. They call it, the preface to the whole story usually says, "In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, there is only war." And the grim darkness aspect has been taken by the community, and it's just colloquially referred to as grimdark, right? And so, by grimdark, we mean it's like it is constant war. If you're a human being, you're either born into like essentially a life of servitude in an agri world, producing crops that are used on a mass scale to feed planets that you've never even heard of,
or
you're in
world.
a hive city and you are just like a wretch in the dregs of society, working 17 hours a day in a factory, and you're lucky that you get paste to eat at night. There's nothing that's good about the humans. There's nothing that's bad about the other races.
Paste.
Yeah, see that's the thing. Like that's one of the big sticking points with humanity is like they're everywhere, and because of that, they tend to win through sheer numbers. If you're in a fight with something and I lost 1 million of my troops, that's nothing. Nothing at all.
Yeah. And we'll talk about the vast quantities, but that's actually a really good point. Remember, the scale of this is the galaxy. We're talking about 41st millennium at a point where humans have literally spanned the entire galaxy, and in this setting, the galaxy is 100 light years across. Sorry, 100,000 light years across in diameter. Is that right, Shane? I believe that's correct.
I think it's something like that. It's some stupidly big number because it's Warhammer. It's something stupid big.
Anyway,
and that's another quick thing I want to point out to anyone who's just getting into the hobby. It's ridiculous. We know, and we love
everything
it.
Dialed up to 11. That's
everything is dialed up to 11, and that's why we love it, because it is unapologetically over the top.
It's so over the top and grimdark that it can just be hilarious. Like, orcs fly across space with rockets strapped to literal asteroids. And it's just ridiculous. But at the same time, it's terrifying because if an orc lands on your planet, they're technically fungal spores, and you're never getting rid of them.
No, not without anything short of ExtermiNERDus. You're not getting rid of that orc infestation. Name drop.
He said it, guys. He said it. That's the joke. He said it.
Pack it up. We're done here. Everybody go home. So we're talking about the galaxy in the 41st millennium, and how humanity's essentially trying to secure a space for itself. But an interesting portion about it as well is that in the past, humanity had a golden age, and it had sprung throughout the the galaxy, and it had created an empire, an interstellar empire. But due to certain events that we'll go into in a moment, that empire was torn asunder. And instead of that empire, you now have 10,000 years of stagnation and religious, basically, work,
Persecution,
yeah, persecution and heresy, quote
suppression.
unquote,
So,
and
I'd
yeah,
say suppression and persecution would be the two best
technological
words to describe.
stagnation. Yep, no advancement, and we'll get into why
Actually,
that is.
if anything, they've gone through a de-evolution technologically at this point.
Yeah, so, imagine, like, Star Trek, right? That's an ideal future where everybody's suddenly cooperating, there's no real need for currency. Warhammer's not that.
No.
It is anything but. It's imagine barbarian tribes.
Ironically, the two kind of have similar paths starting out, because in the Star Trek universe, they've actually had like kind of a Mad Max world going on for a little bit in the lore. So they're not actually
Well,
as similar as you would assume.
well,
But-
and on the
Go ahead.
yeah, so along with this kind of galactic warfare is what essentially the setting boils down to. Along with that is this sort of alternate universe that is called the warp, and this universe exists parallel to the galaxy, and it is essentially a product of every living thing's emotional energy. So, for example, all of our collective, all the human beings, all of our emotions, our quote unquote souls, have a ripple effect in this mirror dimension that coalesce into various energies, and we'll get into what that is. But the warp is essentially the source of magic, for lack of a better term, in the setting. But it's like magic dialed up to 11. It's like
It's magic dialed up to 11, and it's really, really dangerous to use. It's super fucking dangerous to use. And like magic users are called psychers. They are simultaneously one of the most powerful things in your army and one of the fucking scariest. Because if they lose control for even a second, bad shit happens.
so. Have you ever imagined like grotesque demons or anything like that? Um, so anyone who
Looking at my browser history again.
we don't need to know about your sick habits there, but this is a family friendly channel.
The fuck are you talking about, shitstain?
Oh, that's not very nice. So yeah, imagine your worst nightmares coming to life, if you lose control of your psychic ability and possessing you. And that's kind of the peril of the warp, is that this energy that coalesces out there can form into a demonic entity. For lack of a better word, it's more of just like an energy being. Um, that
Which
can
is which is also worth noting that the warp is also kind of a what's the word I'm looking for here? Kind of a commentary on the races within the Warhammer world itself, because the warp was originally neutral energy.
Yeah, it reflects what the living creatures in its mirror dimension reality, right? Reality and unreality.
But there's so much violence and bloodshed and stuff that's just overpowering all the other good stuff that it's reflecting really nasty shit back at us. That's kind of what I'm going for there. It's reflection of the sentient races of the galaxy, and it's kind of saying your shit.
All right, Zach, are you following with us? Are you still here?
So what I'm understanding is that the warp is essentially sort of kind of like a Lovecraftian type alternate dimension.
That's not a bad way of looking at that.
That is a very good analogy, actually.
Mostly for the fact that the warp is just so unknowable and so grand and immense and so incomprehensible to the human mind. That's exactly why it draws those parallels, I think.
And
So
another thing that I've heard is the warp synonymous with, I've heard people talk about chaos. Are those the same thing?
We're getting to that. Don't worry, Zach. What we're doing is we're kind of backtracking a little bit from the 40,000th millennia to give you a little bit of a history lesson, so we don't overwhelm you all at once, because there's a bunch of lead in. But yes, the warp and chaos are hand in hand. They have very close ties to each other.
chaos exists within the warp, but it does not define what the warp is.
It's a rectangle square.
Yes, yes, it is. You math majors out there, you listening? This is where your degree comes in handy. All right, so whoever got that, on the
This is the only. This is the only place it's going to come in handy. Get back to work at Starbucks.
That's right. You're with the artist.
That's
now.
whew.
So,
Wear your mask.
so but let's you said you talked a word out there that's central to the image of Warhammer 40,000, and that's Space Marines. That's kind of what everybody thinks of when they think of Warhammer 40,000, and they don't really know much more about it. Space Marines are sort of the poster child of what is Warhammer 40,000, and they are a part of. No, sweet Christ. But they're a genetically altered superhuman.
Yeah, let's start our backtrack a little bit.
Let's actually talk about humanity.
Let's start our backtrack a little bit.
The war.
So we're gonna gloss over some large events that I know some people are chomping at the bit at, like the Horus Heresy. We're just gonna get the nitty gritty and that kind of stuff. So just be prepared for that. I don't want to see anything in the comments about it. Right now, the current state of the universe right now is basically the Emperor was gravely wounded, and he is essentially acting as a lighthouse within the warp to
Okay, all right. Hold on. Slow it down here. We're tossing out chemical names.
Okay. The Emperor's out of commission right now, and humanity's fractured because of it.
Hold on.
Yes, the Emperor is the unified leader of all of
humanity.
humanity.
The Emperor is the
he is
unified
also
leader of all of humanity.
He's essentially a reincarnation. Of that's a theory. It's basically that's a good way to put it.
He essentially conquered all of humanity and brought them into space.
He's not a good dude. Quote unquote. He's not a good dude. He's not a good dude. Like a lot of the problems in Warhammer could have been avoided if the Emperor had his parallel. Yeah, basically, kind of.
He didn't like you.
Yeah, that's a Horus
Space Hitler Jesus.
Actually, that's a Horus Heresy. Yeah, but we'll talk about the Horus Heresy in a little bit. But so let's talk about the beginning of the human empire.
How far back are we talking? Are we talking like
called
Emperor birth to
Imperium
forward, or are we talking like when he starts establishing stuff? So back to the Emperor. Let's talk about
we're gonna just paint some big pictures here,
because that's really where the Emperor's story is starting, unless you want to go back to like the Dark Ages or whatever. But essentially, if you've ever played the Mass Effect trilogy, it's kind of like the Geth and the Quarians, where what happened is we had two different kinds.
All tally arts is Shane tally arts is greatly appreciated.
ExtermiNERDus at gmail.com.
Anyway, the point I'm making is basically there's a golden age of technology, and then we started creating AI as a race. And then that AI created its own AI. The AI we created was the Iron Men. The Iron Men then created an AI called the Golden Men. Kind of. More or less. That's
more or less.
A lot
as much as we know.
Lost.
Everything about one thing to keep in mind as we go forward
and theory and guessing. There's very few remaining records from this time.
And the story is built around the fact that information is so fucked that everything is canon and everything's not canon. So anything you can think of probably happens somewhere in this gigantic galaxy, and maybe, or if it sounds contradictory to something else, maybe somebody had
what we're
lost
saying
the corrupted
is
records or something.
Basically,
so like everything both is and is not
accepted lore by the community,
more or less. More or less accepted.
That's not bad.
It's like Rule 34 for Warhammer. If it exists,
actually,
there's Warhammer.
So basically,
the same amount of titties.
AI created AI. Then this big ass war broke out between humanity and the AI, and this led to. By this time, we had we hadn't conquered the stars, but we were among the stars at this point. There were colonies and stuff out there. But the war with the Iron Men and the Golden Men essentially put us back to a Mad Max state, and we lost contact with all of those colonies, all of those worlds. And this is where the Emperor of Man decides to step up. Now, it's
right. So essentially, humanity reaches a technological pinnacle. They fall, and that's called
Golden
the,
Age, then
Age of Strife.
And
when
it's
no
also
longer
worth
able
noting,
to
though, that
hold
the
a
Emperor has been
intergalactic
watching from the
empire.
shadows since like the Stone Age at this point.
This gentleman's been
he's
alive for
biologically
approximately
immortal.
45,000 years or so. We'll talk about the Emperor in his own episode.
He doesn't,
But
yes,
he is
he
also
doesn't-
biologically
he doesn't
human as far
age
as
like
we
we do.
understand it. Or so he insists. In the present 41st millennium, humanity worships the Emperor as a god, although during his lifetime, he always insisted that he always rejected his apotheosis. He insisted that I'm not a god, do not worship me as such. In fact, he preached atheism because he believed religion was not conducive to humanity's survival.
That kind of turns me off.
I love it.
Unless
But
a leader
basically what
claims
happens is we
divine
hit the
right,
Age of
I really
Strife,
have no respect
and what the
for
Emperor
them.
Somebody play
does is he
Crusader
starts
King.
kicking ass and taking names on Earth. He's basically forcibly reunifying the Earth from a Mad Max state. And
yeah, so there's these barbarian tribes and everywhere. Whoever warlord can control the area and the resources like water and food, they're the king, and they're
Totally
techno-barbarians is how they're
understand.
referred to because they have these remnants of
They can't
technology
repair it
that
or
they don't
anything
really
like that.
they can't really make it anymore. Yeah. The Emperor kind of shows up and he creates this genetically modified strain of human
However,
beings
they
called
do
Thunder
have
Warriors, which are
several
these
drawbacks, which
big-ass
is why
brutes that are really
you don't
fucking
hear much
hard to
about
kill.
them these days. But he essentially uses the Thunder Warriors to completely reunify Earth. And once he's finally done that, the first thing he basically does is he axes the Thunder Warriors and moves on to basically what's essentially Thunder Warriors version 2.0, which is the Primarchs, which is 20 of his sons that are based off his genetic template.
Well, hold on. When we say
In terms of
sons,
endearment, they
they're
also do have
they're
some of his
referred to
genetics
sons
as
as
well.
like a
There is
term of endearment, but they're just
there is blood relation there, but make no mistake,
oh, they're
he grew
all
those
made with his
motherfuckers in
genetic
tubes.
material, and in a way, they represent facets. He grew them in a vat. And so he grew 20 of these Primarchs in what he called the Primarch Project. But 2 of them have been lost to Imperial records. By the order of the Emperor, they have been completely scrubbed. We don't know why. Nobody is allowed to talk to them on punishment of death. They
Alpha
have been
and
completely
Omega
removed.
legions,
And
I
that
believe.
is, I believe, Legions 2 and 18.
I think it's Alpha.
But,
One of them's
somebody-
definitely Alpha Legion. I think,
Or that's
yeah, Alpha
wrong.
Legion's
Somebody
definitely.
correct me on that.
That's,
No, Alpha Legion was not scrubbed because we fucking know their name.
oh no, I'm thinking of ones that tried.
We
to
don't
scrub,
know
never mind.
anything about the 2 legions that we don't know.
Anyway,
we know literally.
but yeah, 2 of them are completely scrubbed. We don't know anything about them. But basically, what happened is Chaos was a player at this point, like not a major player, but a player in on the galactic stage, and they saw what was going on with the Primarchs, and instead of letting them reach maturity and the Emperor having his way, they actually spread all of the Primarchs to different worlds, and
there's some speculation that it's
and
because
that's
the Emperor
when
made a deal with
the
them
Unification
to do so.
Wars started,
but we'll get into that in another
which
point.
is
The point is they spread them out across
which
space.
was a twofold campaign by the Emperor. Yeah, no, the Unification Wars was the Mad Max stuff. Never mind. I'm thinking of there's so many fucking terms, man. The Crusades. Yeah. So he started the Crusades, which was a twofold
it was the
thing.
the
It was
crusade,
one
right?
to find his lost sons, and 2 to reunite humanity. to its previous state before the Age of Strife.
Right. So when humanity reached this technological pinnacle, we conquered all of these planets out there in the galaxy. And then when the Age of Strife hit and everything went all Mad Max, we lost contact with them. And it's been thousands of years, right? And these
Somewhat
planets, some of
feral.
them have reverted to like feudal, medieval style technological levels. Some of them maintain. Yeah, some are completely
And then
barbarian,
there's
you
an
know, basically have
interesting there's
lost
a
language at
few
this point because they relied
very
entirely on
few
intergalactic
interesting
trade. You know what I mean?
cases where they kept moving forward and they were actually hunted down because of reasons we'll get into later.
Point is, the Emperor went after uniting Terra. The Emperor went out into the stars in the Great Crusade to recover all of humanity and bring them under his banner. And to do so, he improved upon the design of
Thunder
the
Warrior
Thunder
till
Warriors
he's slaughtered
and
like the
created
bastard he
what's
is.
now called the Adeptus Astartes. Well, sure, yeah, but we'll get to that in another episode, I think. But the Adeptus Astartes are what's commonly referred to as the Space Marines. And these are humans that have been augmented with 19 genetically modified organs. And so we talked about how the Emperor made these sons, the Primarchs. So using each of those sons' genetic template, he crafted the template for these Space Marines and assigned a legion of these genetically modified super warriors to each of his sons. Then these are the Space Marine legions.
Think Master Chief on steroids, basically. Curated as young men, they're fed a diet with caramite in it, I believe, that basically reinforces their bones, and then they go through this whole years-long process going through a bunch of different trials where new organs are inserted, like an extra lung, an extra heart, stuff that makes it so that they're basically super hard to kill. They're superhuman. They're all giants
Each
of men.
Each of them is 7+ feet. You know, in the process, they instead of a rib cage, they develop essentially an exoskeleton on their stomach, and they're super soldiers. And each one of them is implanted with, as Shane was saying, gene seed organs, which are a set of 19 organs. So among things, like you said, extra heart. You have more interesting, crazy crap like I forgot the name of the organ exactly, but it lets the Marines spit acid. You don't see this a whole lot.
Yeah, you don't see them a whole lot. Like you mostly see like the extra lung and extra heart. Those are the really popular ones that everyone knows about. But like there's even ones that they stick in the brain. There's stuff that they stick next to the heart. There's little glands and stuff that they add that we'll get into all that in another episode. But basically,
one really important one is called the black carapace, and it's this extra layer of skin essentially that lets them infuse with their suit of power armor. And this is a set of essentially, imagine like plate armor, but if Master Chief's armor was in the style of World of Warcraft, shoulder pads the size of a skyscraper.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so in Halo lore, no one but Master Chief and other Spartans can wear that kind of armor because it'll overload your body and kill you because you can't handle the reaction from the armor. You don't even have that option in Warhammer in the Warhammer world. You need to be a Space Marine for this armor to operate properly.
A regular person can wear power armor. It just won't be as effective.
But it won't be as effective properly, I said.
Right. Don't be misleading our young impressionable viewers.
Our young impressionable viewers. Like I'm forgetting the name for some reason. It's the Inquisitors tend to favor some power armor sometimes. Yep, Eisenhorn's a really good example of that. They really like the power armor, even though they don't get all the benefits from it. Even wearing it as a normal person is it'll make things a lot easier sometimes.
So the Emperor makes these legions of Space Marines, and in High Gothic, which is like the fancy language of the universe, the humanity speaks, they call it they call them the Adeptus Astartes, and you know, this is just part of their imperial classification. You know, don't forget the Imperium is this huge bureaucracy, and the Space Marines are just another layer within it.
And not to mention names do change over time. So we'll clarify when necessary.
But speaking of this power armor that the Space Marines were clad in, a lot of this was developed by what was called the Mechanicum or the Cult Mechanicus. And sometime when humanity was first.
This is where we're going to let Alex talk for the next 20 minutes.
Is that not what we've been doing this whole time?
You're a Mechanicus expert.
Yeah, I wouldn't say expert. I enjoy the cyber steampunk aesthetic.
He knows as much about Mechanicus as I do about Necrons. Let me put it that way.
Fair enough. But point is, the Mechanicum, we'll call it for now, is essentially humanity's colony on Mars, right? That's how it started. When humanity first started going into the stars, terraformed it, and we went to town. Well, come the Age of Strife, which we briefly touched on earlier, humanity is no longer able to communicate with each other. We can't travel, can't do anything like that. So Mars is cut off. And during these thousands of years, Mars develops on their own. And the terraforming that was done to Mars becomes useless because it becomes an irradiated nuclear wasteland due to all the war and other various events that happen. But point is, they go to technology, right? As their
Fallout. Think Fallout, but red.
That's an apt comparison. Yeah. So they end up going underground in order to survive the environment. And over thousands of years, they worship machinery and technology as their savior, right? Because without it, they would not have survived this period.
And what starts out as worship and maintain the machines and doing it properly, much like everything else in the Imperium, slowly degrades into more cult-like stuff, rubbing oils on it, saying prayers, burning incense.
So they no longer know how to make new things, but they know how to make this thing, and they know that if you rub this oil on it, it'll work because it's worked that way for 1,000 years. We don't know why, but
well, that's not entirely true. If they've got the STUs,
the what?
But that's the
STCs,
basically blueprints. STCs, yeah.
STCs.
The STCs, the blueprints, but those are so far in between that your point obviously stands.
Right, but this is all getting to the fact that now in the 41st millennium, the Mechanicum, Mechanicus, Adeptus Mechanicus, has allied itself back with the Imperium of Man. Basically, when it's rediscovered by humanity, the Emperor joins with the Mechanicum because they are the only ones able to produce tech, right? They build tanks, they build weapons, they build power armor. They're the only ones that still have knowledge on how to do any of this. So he needs them, and he convinces them that he is essentially their Jesus by laying hands on a fallen Titan war machine, and it is magically healed. And so they assume that he is the Omnissiah and the aspect of the motive force come to life. And
it's also worth noting, we touched on this earlier, how big a deal religion and religious intolerance is within the Imperium. The Mechanicus is technically a different religion, and they're only allowed to get away with this because of how goddamn important they are to the Imperium. The Imperium cannot physically operate without the Forge worlds that the Mechanicus run. Without them, no tech, they go right back to the Stone Age.
Exactly. The Emperor, he said there's no religion, there's nothing. Mechanicus had this religion, and he couldn't do anything about it because he needed them.
Yeah, even before the cult of the Imperial cult was established, these guys were basically running this religion. So their religion even predates that. And technically it's heresy in the current Warhammer lore.
Well,
but again,
the thing about the ecclesiarchy is if you can somehow make it fit into worshiping the Emperor, you're good to go. So like
they all, well, I mean, it doesn't hurt that they produce Titans.
Right.
Let's be real.
But I mean, there's a bunch of cultures that worship, let's say, a sun god, but they say, oh, yeah, he's the light of the Emperor is what we really worship.
But the Mechanicus is the best and biggest example of religious divergence that's tolerated.
Yeah. But the point is that they're essential. Without the Mechanicus, there is no weapons, there's no power armor, there's nothing.
And another thing to point out is a lot of humanity's expansion onto unknown planets isn't so much fueled by we need more resources or anything anymore. It's more the Mechanicus looking for old tech. They're looking for things called STCs, which we'll get into another episode, but basically it's blueprints to build stuff, which a lot has been lost since the golden age of man.
Yeah.
So most of humanity's exploration is fueled by that these days.
Right. Yeah. Just a short primer, as humanity had all of the blueprints from all the technology they could ever need when they started exploring space on these things. But so the Mechanicus joins with the Imperium, and sometime about the year in the 31st millennium, the Horus Heresy happens, and this is a crucial point in the Imperium's development, and really in the story of.
And just a quick thing that was glossed over. At this point, all the Primarchs have basically been found, or all the ones you're gonna find.
They have all been found.
They have all been found at this point. All of them have their legions. The Imperium of Man is at its highest power at this point. Right now, at the 31st millennium, the Emperor has all of his ducks in a row.
Yep, the Great Crusade is in full swing. It's been going on for about 200 years. And the Emperor's like, you know what? Everything's going great. Progress is right on track. I'm going to appoint my favorite son, quote-unquote, Primarch Horus Lupercal, as the War Master in my stead, and I'm going to return to Terra to work on a project of the greatest importance. Well, he doesn't tell anybody what this project is, but we know as the audience, the readers, right? But he doesn't tell his sons.
And also on the topic of him not telling people stuff, it's important to note that we kind of touched on chaos a bit and Xenos and all that. The Emperor wasn't sharing these details even with his Primarchs. They were completely unaware of this. He was basically saying everything makes sense, science, science, science. There's none of these higher power BS. He was basically he did not prep his Primarchs whatsoever for the existence of the Chaos Gods and Daemons.
Yeah, I mean, they'd say, yeah, there's demons in the warp, or he wouldn't call them demons. There's entities in the warp, right? But they're just different entities. They're not demons or anything special.
He was applying a physicality to them that he really shouldn't justifiably have been applying to them, because of their nature.
Yeah, but with the Imperium, you can imagine it as the epitome of a benevolent dictatorship, and that the Emperor, at least from the Emperor's point of view.
No, you know what? It's kind of like the current Pope and Catholicism.
I don't know enough about the current Pope to really speak on that.
He's very benevolent and smart.
I don't know. I distrust organized religion, but that's a topic for the Ecclesiarchy episode.
But here's the thing: he's still telling his followers what to do.
Right.
That's why. That's why I make
the Ecclesiarchy episode.
Okay, I see.
Anyway, so the Emperor fucks off to Terra, right? And he doesn't tell anyone anything. And he says, I'm going to work on this very important project. And he names his son Horus Lupercal as the War Master. And this means Horus is in charge of the entire Great Crusade, right? From which planets the fleets approach, to what resources are strategic enough that merit expending resources and things like that.
Making sure legions are all doing their jobs. Basically, if it's involved in the crusade, Horus is in charge.
Right. And during this process, Horus, through some vile trickery of one who shall not be named until later, when I'm more ready emotionally to yell, ends up discovering that there are beings in the warp. And not only are there beings in the warp, these beings are so terribly powerful and innately malicious that one could describe them as gods. And so,
which again, they weren't prepared for. And to give you the level of power we're talking about here, just for reference, Khorne, the god of war and blood and skulls and all that, it's said that a single swing of his sword can cleave a planet in half. That's the level of power we're talking about here.
These are beings of just tremendous power. And Horus is really, really upset to learn that the Emperor would hide such a crucial thing from him. And not only that, he feels the sense of betrayal with the Emperor not trusting him with this
Warhammer
knowledge.
40K, like everything else, is daddy issues on steroids.
Well, yeah, and this is your quintessential Luciferian fall, right? The favorite son, the most beautiful Primarch, learns the truth and
Falls because of it. It's a mix between he falls and he was tricked. It's not all.
He was tricked initially, but there's an argument to be made there that some of it was willful.
No, he by the end of it, he was definitely embracing them.
And he was sucking from the demon's teeth.
Yeah, he was.
Warcraft fans, he was drinking that blood, the foul blood.
He was initially tricked, but by the end of it, he was embracing the power in order to be on par with the Emperor, because he couldn't fight him fairly otherwise.
So we're skipping ahead a little, but yeah, basically upon hearing the truths and other factors coming into play, Horus leads a rebellion against the Emperor, and he takes with him exactly half of the Imperium, and by that I mean half of the remaining legions, half of the Mechanicus, half of all of its resources.
Which is important to note also, that it's not only that he just took half of the Imperium. When he finally made his move, it's called the Drop Site Massacre. He basically wiped out 3 other legions. So the Imperium is on the back foot with 6 legions versus Horus.
Remember, Horus is the War Master, and he's a crafty son of a bitch. First thing he does is he kills off the loyalists within his own traitor chapters, and then he makes sure to cut off the biggest and most powerful legions as much as possible from getting to Terra, while he beelines it there.
Right. The big one being the Ultramarines, which he managed to delay for longer than he really should have been able to. But basically, keeping them at bay was what was letting him do his thing.
Right. But despite his best efforts, certain other major legions, such as the Imperial Fists, make it to Terra and are able to mount a defense. Long story short, Horus makes it to Terra, fights his way into the Imperial. Well, he doesn't fight his way into the Imperial Palace. He fights his way, close down there. Opens up his ship. The Emperor comes on there. There's a big duel, and we will have a whole episode about this. I think it would merit it. That's Siege of Terra.
Easily, the Siege of Terra would easily merit a whole entire episode, with what happened to Sanguinian, with what happened to them almost getting through the doors and all that stuff easily. But yeah, they basically have this big drag out fight. And what happens is Horus mortally wounds the Emperor, but the Emperor ends up winning the day. And what he does is he shreds Horus's soul completely, so that the powers of chaos can't resurrect him or do anything like that. Horus is completely gone from the universe.
Disassembled atom by atom, essentially. But this comes at a humongous price. The Emperor is so gravely wounded that he cannot maintain a corporeal existence.
No, it's at this point he is now being interred on what's called the Golden Throne, which it has multiple functions. One, it's a life support system for the Emperor, which he's been sitting on for about 10,000 years now. 2, it also works as kind of a lighthouse within the warp. Basically, the Emperor is using his psychic power to guide and help humanity. That's a whole nother episode, though. Alex, what else? What do you got?
Yeah, so the Golden Throne, he now is interred on it, and he is using everything he has in him to keep demons at bay. So part of this, when Horus came to attack and betray the Emperor, one of the other Primarchs, Magnus, who we talked about briefly earlier, he tried to warn the Emperor by sending a psychic signal. And lo and behold, this psychic signal ended up completely destroying the defenses the Emperor had placed around the project he was working on, which was an entrance to something called the Webway. And this is something that would have allowed humanity to travel without messing with the warp.
Without using the warp. It was kind of like what the Eldar used. Yeah, it's essentially a clone of the Eldar hyperspace lanes.
But it is what the Eldar is, yeah. And
when Magnus went to warn his father, this kind of circles back to the Emperor not telling his sons anything. If Magnus had known about the Web project, he might not have smashed the entrance to it and destroy the defenses and force the Emperor onto the throne to protect us from demonic incursion. But that's a whole nother argument, and a lot of people think Magnus was wrong anyway.
Well, yeah, we'll probably have a Magnus did nothing wrong episode.
I mean, he did.
We'll talk about that. But the point is, but Magnus ends up breaking these psychic defenses, and so this hole into the webway is now constantly assaulted by demons. So now the Emperor, while interred in his golden throne, is using what remains of his psychic will and mortal fortitude
and 1,000 sacrifices a day.
Yeah. That's a whole other story, but he essentially is using all of his will to keep this portal closed and stop demons from overrunning the entire planet. So that's kind of where humanity's at now.
And acting as a lighthouse within the warp for navigation purposes.
Yes, he does do the Astronomicon thing, but we'll talk about that in a space travel episode.
There was the whole Horus humbug, and then which left space Jesus Hitler on the great golden life support system.
Yeah, you guys should check out Emperor has text to speech if you want a good laugh. But yeah, it's so funny. But yeah, basically there's other Xenos and stuff in the world, and like I was saying earlier, they're basically on a level of known that the demons and stuff were known to the Space Marines before the Horus Heresy.
Well, that's not necessarily true. I mean, the humanity as a whole knows that there's Xenos are out there. They're told to hate the alien, burn the witch, and
that's the heretic. That's true. That's a good point. But like, if you ever see one or even see a Space Marine in your lifetime, you can basically guarantee your planet's fucked. So starting off, Alex, why don't you walk us through the Eldar stuff?
Sure. So the Eldari are one of the major players in the 40K galaxy. They're imagine space elves, right? So you get your elves from Lord of the Rings. They're pretty and they're strong and they're fast and they're psychically capable. And they live
also genetically engineered.
Yeah, something like that. But they're incredible, but they're also dying out. And sometime around 30K, they brought around the end of their own civilization, essentially. And we'll talk about that in greater detail. But their excess of their society, because of their immortality, they kept seeking greater and greater pleasures, greater and greater thrills, something that would make them feel. Because over time, normal things stopped having an impact, right? You can only do something.
Yeah, like if you for an example, say you skydive a lot, the first time's always going to be the biggest high. It's always going to be the biggest thrill.
Right.
Well,
so now the dragon,
yeah. Amplify that across living forever and every experience.
So they end up doing more and more depraved things, to the point where by around the 27th millennium,
Alex, did they hold hands?
Whoa, hold
Alex,
on. This is a family-friendly podcast. We don't talk about things like that here.
Oh my God, they held hands. Oh my God.
By family-friendly, I mean the forest pals from South Park. That's the family we are here.
Yeah, the family-friendly by all three of us are half in the bag and swearing.
I wish I was half underground, if you know what I'm talking about.
6 feet Don't half-ass one thing. Don't half-ass two things. Whole ass one thing.
Okay, Ron Swanson, you keep up. I believe in you. Make sure you go to sleep with wet socks on.
Right, yeah, to stop that hangover. You take the cow to the butcher floor. Anyway, so what I'm getting at is the Eldar started doing more and more depraved things, to the point where they got to committing essentially murder orgies, where they would fuck and then kill random people and run around the streets chasing down innocents and raping their skull holes while just to get any kind of emotion. And so this ended up birthing a god of excess known as Slanesh in the warp. And this is essentially the downfall of Eldari society. Now they exist as a fractured race. Some of them travel on spaceships called craft worlds that are the size of planets. Some are exodites and fled to maiden worlds where they live, on planets now. Some are traveling between various Eldari groups, telling the story of their laughing god, while others, still known as the Drukhari, have chosen to flee to the city of Kamora within the Webway, and there, instead of giving their souls to Slaanesh, they torture others and feed that energy instead. So
it's also worth noting that the Laughing God faction that Alex is talking about are called the Harlequins, and they are a playable faction within the game as well. Imagine the Jester from Hunchback of Notre Dame, but he's got pointy ears, basically. Yeah, so those are the three factions in gameplay. That's how that manifests from the lore: is Eldari, Drukhari, and Harlequins.
On a scale of 1 to fucked, we've got the normal elves, the Eldar, and then the Dark Eldar. So I know the Dark Eldar are like super fucked, like they drink like a million cans of Monster, and now they're like really pent up sexually. But like how fucked are like the normal elves? Like, did all the elves that were bad become the Dark Eldar, and now like what's left of the Eldar are normal, or?
So what happens, Zach, is essentially Eldar society was going towards the depravity, but quite a few decided to break off and live a simpler life, a less technological life. These are the craft worlders. They're the ones that they did their own farming. They did all that stuff. They, like I said, they lived simpler lives. It was as simple as that, because they were afraid what would happen if they kept living lives of excess. Whereas the majority of the Eldar continued to live lives of excess. When Slaanesh was born, what happened was Slaanesh fed on the souls of most of the Eldar population, killing them all. The craft worlders were protected from this, and some of the Eldar that would become Drukhari were protected from this. So basically what's left over is your super depraved peeps, then your craft worlders, which are your classic Eldar and stuff, and then the Harlequins. That's how they got to where they are now. Because most of the society was just like, yeah, and we're gonna fucking kill.
All we know about them really don't really know much, but we know that they came from somewhere outside of this galaxy.
One of
all they want to do,
I guess, slightly newer, but not terribly newer factions, the Tyranids. They're basically xenomorphs from outside of known space, but worse. So what the Tyranids are is they're basically your hive faction, and what they do is they go planet to planet, killing and eating everything and collecting the biomass, assemble it, getting it all, making their fleet bigger, and then doing the same thing on the next planet. They like to send out spores, which will infect the local people to start gene stealer cults, is what they're called, because Tyranids will take on the genes and traits of whatever species they can find to make themselves stronger, better, faster, deadlier, all that stuff, which really doesn't matter, because if you're planet side, you're going to get melted down into the genetics pool and sucked up into the spaceships anyway, but semantics. And there's 3 fleets out there right now. There's a bunch of theories behind where they came from. They're clearly inspired by the xenomorph from H.R. Geiger. Yeah, they absolutely look straight up like bugs. They're your yeah. If you've seen Starship Troopers or if you played StarCraft, you know what we're talking about. That they're the bug swarm faction. That's what they are, and they totally own it. There's like some higher thinking ones and stuff, but for the most part, they're just mindless drones that are going to go get killed and kill.
Right, and all we know about them really don't really know much, but we know that they came from somewhere outside of this galaxy, and all they want to do is eat.
I can relate to that. I can relate to wanting to just eat.
So they come to a planet, they turn everything on it into a liquid form of biomass and suck it all up, and they use that to make more bugs, and they move the fuck on.
Which really sucks if you're in a gene stealer cult, because you're just like, yeah, I'm worshiping the Tyranids. Oh, I'm getting melted down into DNA? Something tells me that not everyone's on board with that when it happens.
That does sound like a pretty bad cult. You know what a cooler cult to follow would be? What a cooler former praise be to God, Emperor.
The corpse emperor, you mean? Anyway, moving on to our favorite fungus people. Alex, do you want to take this one away? Because Necrons are next, and we both know who's doing that.
So you love them. You know them. You've seen them all over the place. Orcs, right? They're in 40K. What are they in 40K though? They're not quite like Lord of the Rings orcs. They're a little bit.
They're
more brutish,
man.
Well, yeah, I think what you're referring to is that they're technically fungus. Orcs in this universe are fungal spores, right? And that's how they reproduce. And really, the better term for them is greenskins, because this fungal spore can turn into a variety of different species. The warrior species of that is the orc, right? And this is like an 8-foot tall green-skinned brute that is funny in a way, but also horrific in that if this thing's charging at you, you want to fucking run or you're gonna die. And they stand toe to toe with Space Marines on some occasions, and they're incredible. But orcs, all they want to do is smash and fight. All they want to do is bash Umie skulls and get the shiny gubbins, and that's kind of their whole thing.
One of the best things about orcs is they have a Cockney accent, and frankly, I am here for it. It is fucking hysterical. If you've never seen any of Space Marine by Rare Games, go check out some of their video clips where orcs are actually talking. Holy shit. It is
so
funny.
Good. By the way, if you haven't already, play Space Marine. It's just a fun action shooter. Zach, if we're not linked on Steam, you should share my library and play it.
I actually haven't played it yet.
Play it. It's in my library, brother.
I should. I've been stuck on the Mechanicus game, unfortunately.
These the orcs, their only motivation is to fight. That is their whole culture. Is might is right. Biggest is best, and those who
to the point that if an orc defeats an opponent of equal strength, his body will start releasing hormones that makes him bigger. They are literally designed. They are literally designed.
They grow as they defeat opponents. So and eventually an orc will defeat so many others, it will become a big enough guy, a big enough boy that he becomes a knob, and then a war boss, and he unites the orcs around him, and they follow him to Wah! What you call a collection of orcs. A Wah!
Reply in the comments. Who found out that Wah was just the orcs saying war recently? Because that's me.
Oh, sweet Christ.
I'm not smart. I'm making a podcast with you.
You're right. You should know better than that. Orcs worship two gods, Gork and Mork. Gork is brutally cunning, and Mork is cunningly brutal. And
the lesser appreciated third orcish god, Pork, the other white meat.
Alex, have you heard the recent theory that I just saw online that Gork and Mork are actually the two lost Primarchs?
Yeah, I saw that on Reddit today as well.
Did you? Yeah. I saw that the other day, and I was just like, it's not the worst theory I've ever heard.
It absolutely is. It's dog shit. Get the fuck out of
here. That is not the worst theory you've ever heard involving sport.
I don't know, man. 99% of theories are like absolute ass, so I'm inclined to believe that Alex is right.
But everything in Warhammer is a theory, though, essentially, and it's purposely done that way.
Yeah, and that's part of the fun. But like Gork and Mork being Primarchs,
orcs are pretty fucking stupid.
Yeah, but Primarchs probably wouldn't be.
But that's what makes it so awesome.
What makes it really awesome is that I can mute you.
That's not fair, because no, you can't. I'm admin. You can't mute me. Eat me.
Oh, I can mute you on the when I'm mixing the sound before we post this stream.
Okay. Anyway, moving on.
Well, let's move on and talk about the Necrons. So the orc are basically coming to take over everything they can. The Necron.
Yes.
Shane, you want to tell us about
talk
them?
about
Keep
the
it in
Necron.
your fucking pants, by the way. I want to be able to actually learn more about the sizes, more about the Necrons and the size of their boners. Come on.
Okay, fine. Okay, so the short and ugly version, much like myself, of the Necron lore is that basically the Necrons wanted to become immortal. They petitioned the old ones to help them. The old ones said, no, fuck you. So they were to do so. Well, the Catan did make them immortal, but in a way. They basically turned them into space terminators with no soul and no thought at the like grunt level. Like stronger Necrons have thoughts and stuff and all that. And then what they did was shatter the Catan into the Catan shards. Basically, they're using their gods as Pokemon at this point. And then they're just like, okay, shit's fucked, and we got rid of the old ones. We're gonna go to sleep. And that's exactly what they did. They went to sleep for millions and millions of years, and now they're waking 60 million years. And now, you know, it's actually funny because that's actually basically the story of every Tomb World that's been settled on. Tomb World is basically Necron nap world, and humans, Tau, basically any sentient species will settle on these worlds not realizing it's a tomb world because it's been dormant for 60 million years. How the fuck would you know unless you knew exactly what to look for? And then they wake up the tomb world on accident, and then you've got Necrons running all over the place. But basically, the Necrons are immortal space terminators. They're made out of something called living metal. And unless you have the exact weapon you need, if you were to shoot a Necron and destroy its body, it's not actually dead. The body's going to teleport away, regenerate, come back, and kick you in the balls. There is an important distinction, though, between Necrons and the robots they build. They kind of have a Egyptian motif, and you'll see a lot in the lore. You'll see bug-like creatures and stuff. Those do not have scarabs, centipedes, that kind of thing. Those don't have souls. If you put one of those down, they stay down because it's stuff that the Necrons have built. The living metal can only function with Necron's soul in it. But basically, they're waking back up. They're actually really important in the lore right now. Their king just came back, and it's going to be super interesting to see how the politics of the Necrons work with that. And there's a theory that the king left for dark space because of the Tyranids and all this other stuff, which we'll get into later, and I could probably talk about it for 3 hours on my own. But basically, when you picture a Necron, imagine space terminators that you can't kill unless you have the exact right weapons, flanked by bug monster robots, is essentially what Necrons are. And any world you're on could be a tomb world, and if you accidentally wake them up, you're going to have a really bad day.
Allow me to interject. What ends up happening now is they wake up from this really great nap. And I know this at least resonates with me. When I wake up from a really great nap, I'm pretty pissed off. And so are they.
No. There's a bunch of different high-ranking Necrons, and they've all got different philosophies and stuff, and they all control different factions.
I just have to say, when you mentioned Necron politics, I couldn't help but imagine a bunch of Necrons wearing powdered wigs, and I think that should be canon.
Right, and like basically the king coming back is just like, well, are all the really high-ranking guys going to fall in line or not? And there's theories that one or two aren't gonna, whereas others are, and blah 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 blah. But it basically boils down to a fractured society because the king left, now being reunited, and it's very interesting to see where the lore is going to go because it's currently happening within the books, within the game, all that. It's
Game Workshop doesn't like to move the lore along, and when they do, they don't do it very much at a time. And so this is something they haven't done in a while, and it's kind of big steps. So it's interesting to see what's
it's huge. Like I was a big fan of Warhammer before I got into the tabletop, and Alex is the reason I got into the tabletop eventually. And I ended up picking the Necron faction probably.
I'm sorry. Tell your wife I'm sorry.
Probably what, 2 months before all of this other stuff dropped. Like I got into Necrons like at the perfect time.
By the way, for context, right now it's the end of November in 2020. 9th edition has been out for some time now, and
which Alex and I still kind of suck at.
Right. Well, that's because we've all been unable to play, and you may know why if you are familiar with what is going on in 2020.
If you live in 2020 and you live in the States, you know exactly why we can't play. God, it's like a gene stealer cult that they're trying to fucking quarantine.
Well, guys, let's not get into politics here, folks.
No, we're just gonna get into religious differences between. We're just gonna get into religious differences between the robot people and the fucking normal people.
So anyway, if you pick the Necrons, you get to play as a bunch of General Grievous, and it's really epic.
Actually, that's yes.
Yes, basically, Zach, I got an image I'm gonna send you later.
It's a nude.
It's not a nude. It's basically a General Grievous Necron. It's really cool.
I was going to say General Grievous nude, but
I mean, I could probably find one of those.
If you've got one, I mean, I wouldn't you wouldn't send it to me anyway.
Grievous was originally all organic.
Rule 34 is a thing, gentlemen.
Oh God, have you seen the General Grievous Chan? Like he's an anime girl.
Oh, for fuck's sake!
I'll post that.
Wonderful.
I'll post that in the Discord later too.
You can only get so
anyway.
wrecked.
Moving on.
Okay.
You can only get so wrecked.
Right.
So moving on, we've got the upstarts.
Yeah. So whereas the Necron are the ancient grandfathers of the universe, sort of, the Tau Empire is the new kid on the block. They are they're younger than humanity in terms of they're just in the last 4,000 or 5,000 years exploring more than one planet. You know what I mean?
But they are, but it's also worth pointing out that the Tau have evolved, I guess would be the best way to put it. No, not evolved.
What are you getting at here?
Grown as a species, as a race, technologically, philosophically, culturally, much faster than any other race we know.
I mean, they're making progress. Yeah.
They basically went from Iron Age to not warp travel, but basically spacefaring species in 4,000 years.
Right. But
incredibly fast travel.
Nowhere near as fast space travel as is available to the other major players.
No, because they can't use the warp. They're actually considered they have very little presence within the warp.
So,
which most sentient,
as we were kind of talking about the warp before, it's this mirror image, right? So if your mirror image is bright light, a Tau is a small, tiny little candle or match burning for a short amount of time. Like they are almost worth nothing to the dozens of the warp because of their impact being so minimal. But the Tau Empire is essentially a collection of alien races that are structured on a hierarchy, on a caste system, and this caste system is incredibly rigid.
Yeah, there's 5 castes. There's basically earth, water, air, fire, and the final one is ethereal. And ethereal are essentially the boss of the other castes.
There's some shenanigans going on, is believed.
There is shenanigans going on and some actually very good theories that we'll talk about later. But basically, every caste does its thing. The ethereals are the bosses. The fire caste are the warriors. The water caste are the scientists, etc., etc., etc. But the unique thing about the Tau versus other Xeno species is they try and integrate other species into their own culture. The Tau, they're trying to turn it into a people, not a species. They've even actually done that a bit to the point where they've introduced a species called the Kroot, who are basically the Kroot are really fucking interesting. The Kroot, the best way to describe them is sentient, low-powered Tyranids. If they eat you, they're gonna gain some of your strength. They're gonna gain some of the genetic stuff that makes you better than they are in some aspect. But they're not all of a sudden gonna change and like melt into DNA puddles or anything. They're
no, but they'll evolve within their own lifetime.
Yes, they'll evolve within their own lifetime. They're more even.
Literally, they are what they eat.
They are, yeah, exactly. They are what they eat. Oh God, I'm gonna be a potato.
Gonna be. Yeah, you're so lucky that you're not watching.
Yeah, you guys haven't seen the horrors that Alex has seen.
Maybe one day as a Patreon subscriber, you'll be able to watch the recording of the video or something one day.
I like potatoes. But basically, if
Smash that like button if you want Shane to do a potato eating mukbang.
don't
He
tempt
eats
me.
them raw.
I
folks. Raw.
I ate potatoes raw with a little bit.
You know
of
what?
salt.
You know what? If we get 100 subscribers, we'll do a whole 30-minute special discussion with Shane about eating raw potatoes.
And how
that is an Alex promise.
And how broken I am on a spiritual level for doing it. And we'll even put a video right at the end of it of me eating a raw potato with salt. But anyway,
please no.
You don't have to watch it. I'll edit the video. But moving back to what I was saying, the Tau are big. They're basically space communists, is what it essentially boils down to. Like
that's the meme. But that's really more than that. They want to unite.
I'm a Tau player, and yeah, it is the meme. Like I'm primary Necron, but you know, Tau backup. But it's got there's merit to the meme.
Yeah. I mean, they're organized in a stratified way that's really tight.
And they're on their 4th sphere of expansion. But again, like Alex and I were saying earlier, their expansions are so small in comparison to the other races because
kind of like Shane.
Look, man, let's not talk about anything that makes everyone sad. But basically the sphere of expansions are really slow and really small because they can't use the warp. They have to use normal space travel that like we have available to us now.
Yeah, like propulsion and things like that. Like fuel, like traditional propulsion methods. It's
and so like whenever like an Imperium ship or something jumps out of the warp into Tau space, it's a huge fucking deal. And it's not for lack of trying. They've been trying to figure it out. But like we said, they're basically
they can't do it.
They
literally can't.
Yeah, because they're basically
they don't have an image in the warp.
They're basically warp dead. Like they would need to get access to the Eldari webway if they wanted to stand any kind of chance. And the Tau are also a little controversial within the community itself because they were kind of introduced as the good guys.
That's how some butthurt players.
That's how some people interpret it. But I mean, if you know about the ethereal cast and all that shenanigans and the history, you know they're not really the good guys. But it is also important to know that human planets have actually voluntarily become part of the Tau collective. So they are making
they've joined the greater good.
They're making inroads. They're nothing to sniff at. Like if any of the other empires were to bring down the full force of their empire on the Tau, they'd crush the Tau. But the issue is they don't have the time, they don't have the resources, blah, 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 blah. Stuff that we're not going to get into right now. But basically the Tau are the little guys that could potentially be more, but right now they're kind of
they're the upstarts.
They're upstarts. That's essentially what it boils down to. They're upstarts. They evolved really quick.
And their whole thing is like Gundam style mechs.
Yes. If you like robots or building stuff that looks like
robots, you're a giant weeb player.
Huge weeb.
Guilty. If you like building robots and stuff and kit bashing robots and stuff, Tau is the way to go.
Well, we were talking about how the Tau have no impact in the warp. Let's talk about the quintessential warp races, the chaos races. And we've kind of lumped these in together as chaos because they're the servants of chaos are a myriad, right?
Okay. So let's do a quick explanation of overarching chaos. There are 4 chaos gods of varying ages, and each chaos god has a rival. There is Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, and Slaanesh. Khorne,
and each god has their own kind of domain, right?
Yeah, it's like a Greek pantheon almost, is the best way to describe it. Tzeentch is the god of intelligence and manipulation. Slaanesh is the god of excess and perfection. Nurgle is the god of change and disease. Khorne is the god of war and blood.
Nurgle is also the god of love and family. Bless Papa Nurgle.
Zach is saying that without any real context, but I love him for it, just so you guys know.
Well, I mean, the fan base does refer to him as Papa Nurgle,
which is 100% true, because he sees his followers as his children and he's giving them gifts. He's taking away their pain and making them immortal. But on the flip side of that, he's also giving them horrific fucking diseases. But like I said, the Chaos Gods are always at odds with each other, but colloquially, all the Chaos Gods and all their followers are referred to as the powers of chaos, because ultimately
the ruinous powers,
the ruinous powers, because even though they're trying to kill each other and they each want to have power over the other, all of them share the same ultimate goal of basically taking over the universe.
And not necessarily the universe, the material plane, right? Which is
the material plane, reality. Planets can get sucked into the warp and become, what are they called again, Alex?
I'm not sure I know what you're referring to, but planets can become sucked into the warp and essentially become stuck there and overrun by demons and things like that.
And those planets had an actual name. Knowing Warhammer, they do, but I can't think of it at the moment. But basically, yeah, planets get sucked in, and there's actually something called the Rift, which is basically running all the way through the galaxy right now.
That's Cicatrix Maledictum.
Yeah, to use the proper name. Which is basically running all the way through the galaxy, which is basically a tear in real space, which is what our space is called versus what the warp is called. And one of the reasons the Emperor had to actually use the Golden Throne as the lighthouse is because of this thing. Basically, it fucks up warp travel. Yes, it does. It fucks up warp travel, Alex.
Now, but this is a new thing. It's only been here for the last few hundred years.
Only the last few hundred years. Yeah, that's something we should point out. A few hundred years is actually a pretty short time scale in Warhammer.
I mean, we're talking about a time period of the major events of the universe taking place within 10,000.
Yeah, no. But the RIP has made the lighthouse.
Yeah, it's absolutely separated.
It's made the lighthouse simultaneously more important, but less effective. But and also getting caught in it, you can get spit out at a different time. Even time does work differently in the warp. But anyway, the point is that the ruinous powers are essentially making incursions on the material plane, and they're doing it successfully because they feed off of the emotions of every sentient being in the galaxy.
Right. And they're all engaged in kind of how Shane described it earlier as rivalries and something that they call the Great Game, which is them trying to one-up each other and gain dominance over the warp and material space. And so Chaos has lots of servants, including those Space Marines that fell with Horus. Those are still around doing things, and they have demon manifestations and such, and they're all equally participating in this war along the galaxy.
Which, another thing I'd like to point out is Horus was considered a servant of Chaos Undivided. And with the way we just described Chaos to you as them all playing the great game and trying to kill each other, Chaos Undivided is a very rare thing.
It's so rare. Like, if those of you have seen how Game of Thrones, like the Lannisters, the Baratheons, all of them, imagine if they all came together. It's really rare that happens. And they did for Horus.
And they did that for Horus. They all gave him equal power, equal blessings, and he didn't show favoritism to any of them, which, say what you want about Horus, that's very level-headed of him.
Because they needed him.
Exactly. And they're all working towards a greater goal, but they can recognize when they have a champion that can further all of their interests at the same time. But Chaos Undivided is an extremely rare thing. I just want to emphasize that. Like, Horus is the only... Horus and his predecessor Abaddon are...
Abaddon.
Yeah, Abaddon are really...
Descendant,
predecessor. Yeah. Both work.
Completely opposite things. Yeah.
Oh, no. Successor. My bad. You're right.
Yeah.
They're really the only two solid examples of Chaos Undivided, where they're getting boons from all four gods simultaneously, because the gods are, if nothing else, all greedy, and they want to keep everyone to themselves.
Right, and that's something that they do. We talk about how they use different forces, and no race is exempt from the touch of chaos, right? They'll go after whoever they can, and they'll use whatever servants, and they'll appoint champions and bless them. Well, bless them is in quotations here, but they'll give them powers and give them boons.
Bless within context of if you're worshiping the god, you would consider it a blessing. Like if you were worshiping Khorne, he'd basically blessed you with a unsatiable bloodlust or something and give you the strength to carry it out on the battlefield. Because insatiable bloodlust is absolutely not unique to one or two Khorne worshippers. They're all that. That's basically all of them. But like to have the strength to carry it out is something entirely different.
Speaking of like insatiable bloodlust, like a thing to remember with these gods is, we like to focus on a lot of the negative things because again, we view the universe through humanity's lens. But like Khorne also represents honor and, battle and those kind of positive aspects. And Slaanesh, as much as it's all about excess and sex and things like that, it's also
about that ass.
Oh, for fuck's sake. It's about mastery of your craft, right? And Tzeentch is about subtlety and intrigue and things like that. So it's not necessarily all bad.
Nurgle is about love and compassion.
Nurgle's about rebirth.
About rebirth, evolution, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
They're about change. They've got their positive aspects, but unfortunately, they're all carrying them out with negative modes of transportation.
To any living being, they're essentially malignant and malign.
Yeah. If you run into them, it's going to be a bad time, is basically what it boils down to. Unless you're a worshiper or you want to worship them. And even if you want to worship them, that does not guarantee you're going to have a good time.
No, just because you worship them doesn't mean they won't rip you to shreds and take your soul.
Yeah, like a Khorne worshiper, say you're on a planet being under siege by Khorne chaos forces and you're just like, you know what? I really like what these guys are doing. I'm going to fucking worship Khorne. That doesn't mean a chaos space marine isn't going to rip you in half anyway. And guess what? When he does rip you in half, be happy about it because your soul is going to Khorne and your skull is going on the skull throne.
That's right. Yeah, Khorne literally sits on a throne of mortal skulls. It's called the Skull Throne. Aptly named, I know.
Which kind of lends its thing to the whole. If there was one word I could use to describe the 40K universe, it was a couple words would be over the top.
Yeah, crank it up to that 11.
And I want to point out to anyone who's listening into this or whatever, and you've never heard of Warhammer or whatever, which if you've never heard of Warhammer, I don't know how you found us.
And I'm sorry.
Basically, I apologize right now. Basically, Warhammer is cranked up to 11. It's completely over the top. As fans, we know it's complete,
right?
That's the appeal. We love it. That's how we love it because you just completely lose yourself in the world. The world's so big. Everything's cranked up to 11.
You can tell these amazing stories, but also have a good time with it because it doesn't have to be too serious.
Yes, exactly. That's one of the things is you don't have to take it too seriously.
Like orcs, they go smashing and grumping and taking the shining gubbins. It's fun.
That's like that's like in our Wrath and Glory campaign where I'm basically trying to turn Choppa into a fucking robot.
There's a lot. There's a lot of fun to be had, even though the universe is immensely dark.
Oh, it's immensely dark. But the universe is immensely dark, but one of its saving graces is how huge it is. Any story you want to tell can be told within the Warhammer universe.
Yeah.
That's how big it is. That's how expansive it is. That's how much lore there is. That's how much source material there is. If you want to tell this story, you can tell it 100%, no problems. That's why the tabletop game is so popular. That's why playing the RPG is such a fun time because Alex and I play that together, and when we're playing it, as far as we're concerned, it's canon.
By the way, that's Games Workshop's official stance. Everything is canon.
Everything is canon. Everything is canon. And like if they haven't specified something, it's canon as far as they're concerned.
Yeah. So have fun with it and enjoy it. And so I think in part 2, we're going to talk about the hobby and what it means to participate in it and the various aspects. So we're going to talk about the painting, the building, the game, and things like that. So tune in.
Yeah, Alex has more experience with that stuff, but I mean, I've kind of gone hard on it myself. So
Right. And we'll
I'm
talk about
catching
how
up
to
to him.
get started. And we'll talk about
Yes, how to get started, what's a good way to get
get
started.
overwhelmed because it's so huge. And just today,
It's absolutely
yeah,
gigantic. It's absolutely gigantic, and we're gonna tell you guys the best way to ease yourself into it, and all that stuff, so that it's a gentler entry to gentler barrier to entry, so that you guys don't get scared off.
right. And just like any other drug, same with plastic crack. The first one's free. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Tune in for part 2. We'll see you next week on ExtermiNERDus.